G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Hey, welcome to Talent Talk, and thank you so much for being here. We really enjoy every week coming together and having unique conversations with really talented and inspiring people who are thinking about work and talent and how we can make, if we got to go to work, we might as well enjoy it, right? And so we want to find those great stories from those people that are leading us, hopefully, to that inevitable conclusion. I'm really excited today because, every once in a while we like to go a little off script and we will change up the format. And today is one of those days where we're going to bring on two guests at one time and have a conversation here instead of breaking it up with two different guests at two different times. So we get that nice little energy of having a conversation. And that's really how this show started, was through conversations. I was going to conferences or meeting people, and I would pull them aside or take them to lunch and pick their brains and ask them as many questions as I could before they went running out the door to find out why what they did made them successful, and what were they doing to make their company successful, and how were they managing their people. And over the many, many years of doing that, and eventually writing a book and coming on the radio show, I realized there was a lot of things that we're all doing that are common truths, and there are some really cool things that maybe we don't know that we can learn from other people. And so instead of just me being the one who gets to hear all their awesome ideas and thoughts, we created this radio show so you can tune in, you can listen, you can hear, and you can even ask your own questions as well. So many of the stories that we've been able to learn over the years went in my first book, The Power of Company Culture. And then my next book, Remote Work, will be out here in 2021, and we'll have even more stories there. Of course, I've been remote. My company's been remote since 2009, but now many of you with the pandemic had to go remote. And so we're kind of learning together on how to make that happen. Now, Talent Talk is live every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you're tuning in live, thank you. But most of you, we have to do almost 2 million downloads a year through all the different services. So it's great if you can go and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher, wherever you find your podcast. Go and subscribe. That way you can make sure you get alerted. Anytime there's a new episode, you'll know when this episode has been posted, and you can follow the show and more great guests. Now, we do live tweet as we're going through here. So if you want to ask a question, if you happen to be listening live, you can follow @PeopleG2 on Twitter. Or if it's after the fact, that's okay too. You can go on, they can find the handles of our guests. You can get the links to their bios or books or anything else that they mentioned that was really cool, and keep the conversation going, which is really the whole point of this show, is for us to have a great conversation. All right, I'll stop teasing you now, and I'll tell you who's on the show in case you don't know. My guests on today's show are Doctors Paul Napper and Anthony Rayo. Hopefully I said that correctly. And they are the co-authors of The Power of Agency, the 7 principles to conquer obstacles, make effective decisions, and create a life on your own terms. That sounds great to me. So Dr. Napper leads in a management psychology and executive coaching consultancy in Boston. His client lists include Fortune 500 companies, universities, and startups. And Dr. Rayo is a nationally known expert in psychology. He started his career as a psychologist at Boston's Children's Hospital, and for more than 20 years has been an instructor at Harvard Medical School. So let's bring these both talented and giant resumes in the door here. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for being on the Talent Talk show today.
Hey, Chris, thanance so much for having us. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I love the work that you both are doing. And I love sort of the path that just in the brief intro here that we sort of heard coming in and how you both have been sort of connected not only to the different parts of the world, I guess, from working in hospitals, working at the universities, but then also taking that work into companies. And I think that's really important. Maybe you could each kind of give us a little bit more about yourselves, maybe anything I missed or it's important for us to know here for our conversation today.
This is my second book. I started a book on an expose on medication trends in young boys in the United States. That led to a project on looking at how anxiety was climbing, and Paul and I put our heads together on this. This is what led to the agency book. We have a little time later. We may go into detail on that.
Yeah, I've been working with business leaders for the last 20 years. I started out my career on Wall Street as a securities analyst and then transitioned into psychology. I joke that I used to analyze income statements and balance sheets, and now I analyze business leaders and how they make decisions. So when Tony was writing this book, that was originally conceived as a book titled The Anxiety Contagion, which refers to the anxiety crisis that exists in the United States. Many people are actually unaware of that, but it's been going on well before the pandemic. And we decided to partner on this just because we wanted to get underneath that and try to understand not only why it was happening, but also what people can actually do about it. Because obviously you can go and get medication, and that's what we see millions and millions of people doing. But we both felt that there was an opportunity for people to take greater control of their lives and also of their mental health. And so we wrote this book to get into that and to give people some tools to help them better manage, better adapt, and take control.
And usually if we have a topic like this on the show, I think a certain population of the audience that will say, well, is there really a problem with anxiety? Or are we just more aware of it? Is it more of an education? Maybe was it always occurring, but no one talked about it? And, is there really an increase? So I'm curious, is there an increase? I mean, we could certainly argue social media and many different factors are different. But then again, like my grandparents lived through the Depression and a World War, and I mean, their life wasn't easy, as well. So which one is it, or is it some combination of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I was a bit dubious myself, thinking like, is this thing really climbing over the years? But if you go back, there are data sets, thousands and thousands of examples and research of people climbing in terms of the anxiety they report decade after decade. It goes back actually to the late 1930s when they've been reliably looking at this, and it just keeps ticking upward. And so we've got sort of similar measures across time that we've been able to see in the literature. And lo and behold, people at least are reporting higher levels of anxiety. At the end of the day, anxiety isn't what happens to you. It's how you perceive what's happening to you, and then your body and your brain's reaction to it. And maybe it's a lot to do with the high-speed world and the high competition, the digital age, the information overload. Maybe that's a piece of it. It's probably a lot of things, but we top out in the world almost year after year with the highest rates of reported anxiety.
And you raised a really important point, though, Chris, which is that anxiety is always, it's a part of the human experience, right? Anxiety is a normal human emotion. We feel it. It serves a useful purpose. So it's part of who we are. It's part of the fabric. So your grandparents, my grandparents, everyone has experienced anxiety in their lives. The question becomes, is it debilitating? Is it too much? Is it and the data suggests that it is. And the World Health Organization, just by way of example, ranked the United States as the most anxious nation on earth a few years ago. And fully 40% of Americans carry around an anxiety disorder clinical diagnosis. So, lots of people are getting medicated for anxiety in the United States. And the reality is, and then I'll let you react and ask your questions, is anxiety is contagious. It spreads from person to person. So if I'm an incredibly anxious person and you spend a lot of time with me, the chances are your anxiety level is going to go up. So, we kind of had a bit of a pandemic occurring with anxiety in the United States well before COVID came along. And it's sort of the sea we swim in. And the question is why, and obviously what can we do about it?
Yeah, and so I wanted to just categorize, make sure I understood. And from the data that Tony was mentioning, it sounds like it's the United States, right? So I'm curious, are there other places in the world where there hasn't gone up consistently, or where they have, maybe at least they figured it out and leveled it off, right? I noticed as an adult, and I noticed for my kids as they grew up and became adults, like we were never bored. And I used to be bored as a kid, and I felt like that was a time to reset, to like think about things, to get closure on things. It's just to kind of like you had time to think about whatever it is. Think about what stupid thing you did and how you weren't going to do that again. How you could have avoided those series of mistakes or whatever. But like now, there's no time for that for many, many reasons. So I'll let you respond. Is there geographical differences, and is this, in some ways about not having that time to sit and reflect and reset?
Well, you put your finger on an incredibly important part of it, which is if we don't have time to reflect or even feel boredom, which by the way is sort of what happens before you go on to something else and usually have a really terrific creative moment, then guess what happens? The brain just can't process all the information, and it sets off the emotional systems. And then those start saying, hey, you might be under threat. Something's going on here. You've got too much going on. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to start to release adrenaline. And then in its wake will be cortisol. And before you know it, we're biologically in that territory. And there isn't that time to catch your breath. To answer your question about different countries, yeah, absolutely, sure. America is a leader for good and for bad. And, we would see, for example, Europe and Northern Europe and certainly a lot of other, really similar industrialized and information-based cultures and large cities, not showing these numbers when, World Health Organization takes a look every year. But they have either caught up or they're really close. And a lot of it may have to do with the media information overload. So the ease at which our minds are instantaneously stimulated by so many things that are happening in the world all at once without, to your point, that moment of where you pause, you collect yourself. Another thing that's happening, it's related. This is what Paul and I discovered as we dug deep for this book is, one of the reasons people feel that they don't have a lot of control, agency in their life, is that they're kind of immobilized by a lot of this anxiety or a sense that the world is acting on them and they can't act for themselves. And we're indoors a lot and we're on screens a lot and we're physiologically not much in motion. And we find that people who are outdoors more actually do better. They showed higher rates of agency. They were able to feel less stressed. Outdoor movement, in particular in natural spaces, may be, it turns out, the key to all this.
I remember having a particularly stressful few years of my life, and I took to gardening. Now, not just a little bit of gardening, but like I did a massive tomato farm. Like I turned my entire side yard into like more tomatoes than my entire neighborhood could ever eat. But it was all like, here I am doing more activity, right? I'm stressed out, I'm doing more. But you're right, I felt better being outside. I was working in the soil. I had, this place to put my brain that was a little bit, could be bored in a sense. I had to be out there tending it every day and looking at them and fixing them. And I sort of have, recounted that to people in the past who have been stressed out, because usually what they end up doing is just, it feels like many, many things that aren't necessarily helpful to their stress or anxiety levels. I mean, they're trying to deal with it, but it's sort of I don't know. It's like, I'm bleeding. Can someone please get me, an ice pack? And it's like, no, it's close, but not quite, right? So what other things can we do to maybe help ourselves stay stable and grounded and maybe deal with whatever we're dealing with at this moment?
Well, Chris, you're ahead of the pack, because what you did in terms of getting outdoors and working in your garden, intuitively, I think you must have just gravitated toward that strategy, and it's a very effective one. There's actually a school of therapy in Japan for depression and anxiety that has people working outdoors, doing physical labor, as a treatment for anxiety and depression. And guess what? It actually works. It actually is proven to have benefits. So in the United States, we're kind of an instant gratification type society, and that's in some ways a bit of our strength, but it's also a weakness because people want instantaneous cures, and there's nothing like instant than a pill, right? And so the idea that, well, I feel anxiety, it's unpleasant, I don't like it. There's, well, just give me a pill for it, and boom, I can feel better. That's all well and good, and it actually, can be helpful at times for people who are debilitated by anxiety. But the issue becomes the pills wear off, their effectiveness wears off, underlying kind of skills or do what you did, which is actually take matters into their own hands and find a creative approach to better adapt to whatever stresses they're experiencing in their lives. You run through all the pills, and at a certain point, as I said before, the poop out effect of psychotropic medication, you're going to run out of road. And then what do you do? So there are a lot of things, and I'll let Tony talk about, what some of those things are that actually help people get grounded, stable, and be more effective.
And maybe before you do that real quick, Tony, we need to take a quick commercial break here for just 30 seconds, and then we'll come back and get your thoughts there on the Talent Talk Radio Show.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the same for 6 months, and the same thing goes for background checks. In a time when so much outdated information is being passed around, it's good to know that People G2 offers something different. At People G2, we provide today's intelligence, not yesterday's news. Our value-added approach offers you a fully FCRA-compliant solution that includes up-to-the-minute information. By combining industry-leading technology with old-school human investigation, People G2 is able to give you information that is accurate right now, delivered quickly through our online system or integrated with your HR system. So ask yourself, are you comfortable working with old news, or are you ready for a different kind of background check company? Visit peopleg2.com or call 800-630-2880. That's 800-630-2880 or peopleg2.com.
Welcome back to the Talent Talk Radio Show. Don't forget to go to talenttalkradio.com, and you can subscribe there. You look at all of our past episodes and find out more about our guests. And of course, you can do that as well by following us on Twitter at PeopleG2. And we have all of the best one-liners, links to bios, books, and anything else. Speaking of books, my guests today, Doctors Paul Napper and Anthony Rayo, their book, The Power of Agency, you should definitely check out. And I think we're going back here to Tony to kind of finish the discussion on some other strategies and things that we can be doing in these situations where maybe we're having high anxiety or high stress to maybe actually make a difference.
Yeah, if your stress comes and goes a bit, peaks, and you know what's causing it, by all means, do the 2 or 3 things I'm about to lay out now. If they're longer than that, then you have to do a bit of a deeper approach, which involves changing the way you think about the world. So the first 2 or 3 things I'm going to offer up for folks actually are first 3 principles that we believe promote agency, our ability to take charge, take command of our lives, and make better decisions, put those into action. And we've already covered them slightly, which is really interesting here. One is, are you controlling what's getting into your head? First thing you should ask yourself, like, what just got into my head? It's probably going to be screen or digital related, and it's probably overstimulating that brain. But getting yourself to a quiet spot is sort of mission number 1. It's a lot more involved in that, but that's the first thing I ask people to do. What just got in your head? See if you can get to a quieter space and get off the screens, at least for a little bit. And the second thing is, who were you around? Like, who's been around you lately? What meeting were you just in? And did you, as Paul was just implying, earlier, or telling us it, you catch other people's emotional colds. Like, so why are you so stressed? It may be that the relationships we have are feeding that, the way other people think, the way they behave, highly contagious. We take them in. The third thing is you're not getting enough movement. And we know Americans just don't get enough movement compared to a lot of other countries. So when you put those first 3 together, right there, you have what I think are the sort of the legs to the stool that help everyone stay stable and grounded. Now, That's not forever. That's not going to take care of everything in the long run. But if you don't have a clear mind, if you aren't associating with people who are supportive, and if you're not physically healthy, in shape, getting outdoor space and light, then you're not going to be able to move on to the higher level things, which are our cognitive principles, where then it's about the decisions you make and carrying them out.
Yeah, I feel like your points 1 and 2 often kind of go hand in hand. I've noticed there's sometimes people that just almost seem addicted to anxiety, addicted to this, like things going wrong and talking about. I mean, they even every show they watch is something terrible happened, and every news article is what there's never any sort of like counterbalance to that, right? I mean, there are times we need to read important articles and know what's going on in the world, and we can't avoid some of those things, but at the same time you have to have some sort of balance, I guess. But you're right, you're those people that are, we might call them toxic, we might call them just whatever it is, but yeah, they can bring you down. And how do you avoid that, or how do you get around that? Are there certain things we should be thinking about? Because it might be your boss and you're stuck at that job. It might be your spouse, it might be your parents, it might be someone in your life that it's hard for you to avoid completely. Are there just things that we need to do, or do we need to just try to get out of those situations? What's the advice there for our listeners?
Well, you raise an important point, which is there are some people that it's harder to move away from. Certainly family members. Clearly your boss is someone if you had to, you can move away from, right? You can quit your job and find a new position. But what we recommend we don't recommend at the first sign of a problem or trouble in a relationship that you cut someone loose, but rather, you need to deal with interpersonal problems as they arise in a candid way, in a respectful way, in a constructive way, by putting them on the table. You need to set good boundaries for yourself, which is to say, I don't want to be treated like this. I don't accept that. You need to try to come at this again and behave differently toward me. You need to set limits, and you need to set good boundaries with people. This is what happens in relationships where they actually become abusive relationships over time. They slip and sort of into that whole mode. So we need to, when we experience relationships that are going off track, we just need to try to get them back on track, and we can usually do that as long as the person we're dealing with is a fairly reasonable human being. So really, that's the more important thing. For relationships that are truly toxic, that are truly destructive or abusive, you need to move away from those relationships, even if it happens to be a family member. If someone's abusing you, that is not a person that you should be spending time with, regardless of who they are. So, I think it involves understanding how important that is, because agency, which again, we haven't really defined that here, but agency is our capacity to take command of our lives through making good choices and putting those choices into action. If we're around people who drag us down, who tear us apart, our level of agency is going to suffer. We're not going to feel empowered. We're not going to feel encouraged. We're not going to feel inspired to take charge of our lives. And that's what can happen. So I think that successful people really recognize that principle. They understand how important it is to surround themselves with positive people who challenge them, people who can teach them something, and people who don't, who surround themselves with negative, critical, overbearing people. They lose their power. I mean, they literally lose their personal agency.
And I'd love to add, Chris, in fact, in this particular principle, we call it associate selectively. We talk a lot about have your own personal board of advisors. Select the people that complement or add to the things that you're going to need in your life. And these are people that they're a text or a phone call away, and you get to know them better. You may also have a skill set that helps them. And these are the people that we lean on, we rely on. But before we make decisions, if we're ever in a jam, we want to be able to have sort of that we used to say, what, you go to the Rolodex. This is sort of like the idea that you have these people within reach, and think about what you need in your life. And so that way you're not just only by yourself.
So, with all this kind of going on and everything that you both have sort of laid out for us here today, does that also mean that maybe it's harder for us to make good decisions? Is that more difficult now than it ever has been? Because, as you guys were talking, I'm thinking through several decisions that I've made this year, and yet still there are some good decisions I've still not made, right? I'm still not exercising like I should be, despite, being stuck in the house. And, I haven't been willing to totally change my life to get the new activities in there, right? And it's become harder because there's the stressors and there's the amount of work. And so how does that playing out right now, especially I guess maybe during the pandemic? Is it harder for people to make those good decisions?
Well, it is hard for people, but it really depends greatly on the individual set of circumstances that are in your life. So what we found in the pandemic, and we've met with literally dozens and dozens of companies and addressed their audience of leaders and managers, is that everyone's in a somewhat different situation where people are very isolated. People who live alone, small apartments in the city. They've been, kind of at working completely from home. For people who struggle with isolation, it's really been hard. They have really been in a tough spot. For people who have a little more physical space in their living situation and live with other people, they actually have access to more support, social support, which is really important. So certainly the pandemic has made things more challenging in all kinds of ways for all of us. But the principles of agency that we discovered that actually help people to make better quality decisions and then more confidently put those decisions into action apply in the pandemic, and once we come out of the pandemic, they will still apply. I mean, these are kind of evergreen principles. But to your point, is it harder? It was harder well before the pandemic. I mean, what we argue in our book is that most people in the United States, and this is probably true for most of Western society, most of us are cognitively overwhelmed. Most people struggle to keep up. The cognitive demands, the thinking demands, in other words, of our modern life, of just the amount of information that's available to us, and what's expected of us in terms of making sense of that information and making decisions based on it, it's overwhelming for most people, for many people at least. I work with very successful leaders, and many of them have moments of overwhelm, probably more frequent periods of overwhelm now than 5 years ago, or certainly than 10 years ago. So how we deal with information, how we in some ways use it, and don't allow it to use us and overwhelm us, becomes a really defining part of modern life and being successful. So we have been overwhelmed, Chris, for a long time, cognitively, just in terms of our thinking skills, but there's a lot of things we can do about that to ensure that we actually make the best use of the fact that we have incredible information available to us today we didn't have 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But it is a challenge. And so what we wrote about in the book is how to make use of that in the best possible way, whether you're a business leader, whether you're, you work out of the home and run your family and you're raising your kids, or whatever you happen to be doing. It's all about the choices you make and how you put those choices into action. That's what defines each and every one of us as human beings. It is at the core of what agency means. So that's kind of our mission, is to help people to develop greater agency in their lives.
Well, we've talked through quite a bit of the I guess what's difficult for people and the anxiety and the stress, and maybe if we take a little of our own advice here from our conversation today, and let's maybe focus for a moment on what can we do? What are the good things that people are doing? And maybe we can start with decision making. You know, what are people who are good at making better decisions or good decisions? What are they doing differently? What should we be learning or taking away from their process?
I mean, I think we could jump in with they're more curious, they're open to learning. That actually jumped to mind, Chris, when you were talking about, I think I'm going to go in and garden. I'm gonna have this experience. I'm really going to dive in. I'm going to dive in deeply, and I'm going to immerse myself in this, which is a really amazing learning opportunity that's multi-sensory, right? It's not just visual and occasionally auditory, which is what we get on screens, but multi-sensory experience and learning all new things. We find that people who feel that they have a lot more control in their lives and are more efficacious, are able to make the changes they set out to make. That's one of the things that we found that they do really, really well, that they position themselves as a learner.
So in addition to that, Chris, the people who are best at decision making also understand how emotions work, and they also understand how human beliefs affect our capacity to make decisions. So the best decision makers understand how to use emotion to help make decisions, and how to avoid allowing emotions to interfere with good decision making. And similarly, they, as Tony said about positioning themselves as learners, they're open to modifying their beliefs as they learn more. They don't operate with a fixed set of beliefs. They may have a very fixed set of values, personal values. Those are sort of overarching values that remain pretty constant, but their beliefs change as they learn and grow. Fixed beliefs are generally the root to people having very fixed potential, and so most successful people update their beliefs as they go along. The other thing is, people who make good decisions understand how their brains work. At least they, understand the basics of how their brains work. So one thing that I would say to you as you were gardening in your backyard, one of the things that was going on while you were doing that is that your brain was working. There were problems you were working out while you were weeding the garden and watering those tomatoes. There was a lot of thinking and reflecting happening inside of your brain. That's how our brains work. We actually do a lot of our thinking when we're doing something else, when we're taking some time to reflect and not necessarily, stare at our computer or analyze data. So what people who make good decisions do is they know how to make use of intuition, and they also know how to engage in critical thinking and use their more analytical parts of their brain. And both our intuition and our critical thinking, our analytical thinking, are skills that we can develop. And the people who make the best decisions, they've developed their intuitive capabilities, and they've also developed their critical thinking skills. They've learned how to do that. Yeah. Most people have not taken the time to try to do that. And it impacts living in the world we live in today, where it's expected that we can make sense of all the data that comes in our front doors. And, if we fall down on the job, the quality of our life deteriorates. So it's very important for people today to understand how we make decisions as human beings and how we can actually learn to make better decisions, which is really not that hard if you just take a little time to do it.
Chris, I was thinking also, like, if you asked people, say in a work situation, how did you arrive at that? Like, what was your thinking on that? Sometimes people just look at you and stare at you. Like, I just arrived at it, like somehow magically. And it's one of the most important things we do as human beings. It's one of the most unique things we do, the ability to think clearly, step outside ourselves. We call that metacognition. We talk a lot about that with our folks. And, can you ask that question, like, how is my thinking? Do I even have a system? Do I use a framework for how I approach these complex task? Do I reach out to people? Do I make decisions in the same spot? Do I choose different places? All these kinds of things. When you think about it too, like we should be teaching this to kids early on. Decisions are absolutely what gets us from point A to point B, and it's all about the ultimate sense that we do have control, efficacy in our lives.
I want to give you a very quick anecdote, Chris, which is that we interviewed for our book a physician here in Boston who's part of the Harvard medical system, an absolutely brilliant physician with decades of experience. He's written multiple books. He's written multiple articles for the New Yorker magazine. I'm just a really unbelievably smart and insightful man. He did a book, interviewed physicians, some of his fellow physicians, some of the best people in the field, and he asked them one simple question, which is, how do you make decisions? What is your process? And you want to know something really surprising? He was stunned that when he asked that question to all these successful physicians, not one of them could really give a good answer to that question. They really had a hard time articulating how they actually think, how they actually use their reasoning skills. So what he learned from that is that, there's this huge opportunity, even among some of the most successful people, for people to really, take a harder look at how they actually think through problems, how they actually think. Do they use a process? Do they have a framework? What is it? And I'll tell you one very simple thing, and then I'll let you ask more questions. But one of the simplest thing that we advise people to do when you're making an important decision, a very important decision to your business or to your own in your personal life, slow it down. That is the thing we learned from all of the most successful decision makers is on the big ticket items, the most important decisions, slow it down. Think about the process you're using. Think of whether there's a framework, a decision-making framework that can help you. But the best decision makers, that's one of the things they do. And they do that very well.
They never rush. They never rush. And they
don't
do it on
the big things.
And they don't do it on impulse. No.
Right. Well, there's been a lot of what you guys said. It reminded me of quite a few books. So certainly I want to make sure people go to check out your book, The Power of Agency. As you were talking about what maybe we should be teaching at school, you may be happy to know my wife's a teacher, and that finally Carol Dweck's work, Mindset, her book, it has really finally kind of come into the school system in a more significant way, which is really great. That book has some really amazing life lessons and thoughts. And my favorite thing out of that book is, they went in and told a teacher, this is the smartest class in the school, and it wasn't the smartest class in the school. And those kids performed way better when the teacher believed they were the smartest class, right? So our opinions of other people somehow make this, new world, right? If we can go in and believe that this is going to be the best group I'm ever going to manage or the best class I'm ever going to teach, right? How different our own reactions and perceptions are. It's kind of amazing. It's really kind of cool placebo effect, right? And also, there was another book that I was thinking of and now I've forgotten, but the other thing that's been really big, since COVID happened in the last year, I have done over 70 trainings, I think, for companies that needed help with how to go remote and what they should be thinking about, what they should be doing. And I would say the most controversial thing that I was teaching companies, and so I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I told them to stop having one-on-one meetings. I think that we can make better decisions in groups. We can communicate better in groups. We can figure out what's happening and support each other in group. I mean, this is why there's group therapy and why there's so many group things. But I think in business, we have this idea with Hollywood, or someone has given us this romantic idea that Steve Jobs sat in a room all by himself and invented everything, right? And did all of these wonderful things, that Einstein was all by himself in a cabin creating, our understanding of physics. And that's just not the case, right? We seem to, as human beings, be able to do so much more together. So should we be more intentional? Should we be doing more things as a group? Is that a strategy that maybe good leaders should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Paul take this in a minute, but absolutely. Absolutely. There is no way that we can solve complex problems by ourselves, and it is a myth. It's a Hollywood-like thing that we'd all like to think. Oh yes, we just sat there with the canvas and this beautiful work of art, or something is chiseled out of stone. It has never worked that way. No writer has created a book all on their own. It just doesn't
Right.
work that way. And then you have to, though, assemble people, and they have to feel safe, right? They have to feel like they have the ability. First of all, you want great range of people and talent and ways and experiences of the world in that room when you are meeting with them, virtually or not. And you want a diversity, if you will. But then you have to make sure that we don't make people feel unsafe. Psychological safety is a term that's often talked about. And then if you're a leader, how you facilitate that, what you do in terms of getting through. And this relates a little bit to Carol Dweck's work as well. Do I have the bandwidth to make a lot of errors and just say things off the cuff and make mistakes? And if I do, I'm more likely to be a lot more creative and fluid in my thinking. And I'm going to likely, in a group setting, solve a very complex problem.
One of the things that we've been, this is in line with what you're doing, Chris, one of the things we've been recommending to business leaders is probably the most important thing for them to do right now to help their companies to adapt to all the change happening, both with COVID and changes in the marketplace, is create clarity for the people around you. And clarity in this sense is simply making sure that everyone in the organization, everyone on the team you lead, knows where we're trying to go, where we're trying to get to as a business, and what is each person's specific role in helping the business to get there. And when clarity is high, engagement goes up, performance goes up, and business results improve. So we've been encouraging that. And with decision making, I think the single most important thing is, as Tony said, and as you are advocating, get the people you most need to make a decision in the room at the time. And whether that's, and so we've been advising people to break, whether that's the full team, it's you as a leader and all of your direct reports, whether it's you as the leader and, two of your direct reports, because they're the ones that have the most relevant information. That's, ensure that you have support and you're getting enough variety in terms of information and perspectives. And then, don't be afraid to be challenged. If you're a leader, let yourself be challenged, and let people have someone play the role of devil's advocate. Have people ask the important questions, which are things like, what if we're wrong? What might we be missing here? Those are really important questions. And the leaders who are willing to ask those tough questions and actually hear the answers to those tough questions make better decisions.
Yeah, I've often seen, if we can practice, it amazes me, if you ever did sports as a kid, you literally practice more than you ever play the real game, right? This is how you swing the bat. This is how you run down the base. This is how you kick the ball, whatever, right? And the coach tells you exactly how you're supposed to do it. You practice how you're supposed to do it over and over again. And there's a clarity about what you're supposed to do to win the game, right? Or to be successful. And then you go and actually do it. Yet in business, it's like, no, we're only in a game. We're in the game the whole time, and there is no practice. So no messing up. There's no, right? And we should be practicing how we meet and practicing how we're going to disagree and how we're going to come to conclusions so that we have that psychological safety. Otherwise, it's like you're under the gun the whole time, right? It's just that kind of that tension. We do a little bit of practicing at my company with some meetings. We do call them tsunami planning meetings, which is what would happen if, right? And we throw an idea out there and we do spend 30 minutes on what if our business doubled? What if there was a pandemic in the world? What if, and we talk through that. And so people get to see, well, Tom isn't going to interrupt me and Jane isn't going to tell me I'm stupid. And I'm not going to get fired for disagreeing with my boss, right? And we can have those safe situations. But I don't know. I'd love to get your thoughts, but it seems so odd to me that we spend our entire work world like, in live action mode, right? Instead of ever in practice mode.
Well, it's a great point. I think that, agency is really fundamentally about engaging in independent thought and independent action. And, psychologists, philosophers, sociologists have talked about this concept of human agency for many decades and written about it. And there's been a lot of literature on the fact that most human beings have pretty limited agency. That is, they follow the herd. They don't make truly independent decisions. And so they're more reactive. And so I think to increase your level of agency as a business, as a leader, I love is this sort of tsunami planning. It's can we take time away from some of the day-to-day action, the day-to-day execution and reactive stuff we have to do, and think and reflect and wonder. And and those are important things for businesses to do. And again, spending time in sort of a retreat, whatever that retreat might look like, just to create some space for reflection and for people to come together and generate new ideas, super valuable. And I think for a lot of businesses, when the going gets tough, and businesses are very much in reactive mode, that can get missed. And so I think getting to a bit of a balance where you're executing and you're full on in execution mode, but balancing that with some of these times where you're doing what you said, which is tsunami planning, and which is, let's try to engage other parts of our brain to think about our business, think about where we are, and think about how we might grow and where we might take some risks, some calculated risks.
And that's really, I think, why Agile and Scrum have been so successful, is because they have these built-in, they have a planning meetings, they have meetings to reflect on what worked, and they have some of these built-in things. And if I remember correctly,
the framework, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And so you are sort of scheduled to talk about how did we do, and then you're scheduled to go and plan, which is in a traditional business, I don't see that, right? It's just sort of go. And we're stumbling as we're trying to make it happen. Now, obviously, understanding your concept of agency is a really important. Is there another thing out there that would be sort of a silver bullet for anyone trying to make good decisions? I know for me, the more we can talk to our people about cognitive biases and making sure they understand where they can get tripped up and where their brain is sort of trying to help them but screwing them up. What other things should we be thinking about in making good decisions?
Well, could I just jump in on the bias end of it? Most of our thinking is biased. Most of our thinking is shortcuts, and it tends to be often irrational and rarely updated, automatic. So it explains a lot when you look at what can happen in poor decision making. We talk a lot about practicing empathy. Not just to be nice. That's not what it's about. It's like a cognitive skill. Can you suspend yourself, your thinking, and try to imagine the thinking and perspective of another person? In doing that, people really are challenging a lot of their biased thinking. They're also slowing down that through reflection. We talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about people sort of exposing their thought chain, not just sort of saying what you need people to do, but sort of telling them, how did I arrive at that decision? And again, it allows people to sort of stop you and say, wait a minute, you made a leap here that doesn't make as much sense. What was that based on? And that's where a lot of these biases really do distort our final decision making.
And I'll just add to that, in terms of decision making, one of the things to pay attention to is, like you said, the bias that gets in the way. If you review the list of human biases, it can be pretty depressing, but necessary work, because I think if what are some of the most common pitfalls that we fall into, it helps you not fall into them so frequently. And then the last point is engage with your team on after action reviews. talk about how did we make this decision and that decision, in the past? What was our decision-making process? What worked really well? What didn't work so well? What did we miss? And above all, create, as Tony said, psychological safety so that it's safe for people to offer dissenting views and to challenge each other. Because one of the things we know is when we get challenged by other people, we make better decisions and bias is less prevalent.
Well, I certainly suggest if anyone is interested in knowing more about cognitive biases, I would suggest The Undoing Project, which is a great book. You can also read Thinking Fast and Slow, but it's a bit more slow and a bit more boring of a read, and it's about the same topic and the same people. So I suggest the guy who wrote Moneyball instead read his version, The Undoing Project. Anyways, how can people find out more about the two of you if they're interested in your books, in your works? What's the best way for people to find out more and get engaged with you two?
Yeah, just come visit us at powerofagency.com, and those will link you to everything we're working on, what we're, and it'll give you some examples of some of the chapters, the concepts. It'll walk you through, and then it's also a way to get to our individual. You can reach us specifically as well as our individual websites.
And there's a small test on there too, a small subtest you can take to test your ability to use the agency principles.
Oh, cool. Not a test to get on the site, but test on. Okay, got it. Well, I really appreciate you both being on the show today. I always love to have kind of a change in format and to have you both on and to talk through all this. There's so many important things that the two of you have brought to us through your book and through your works that every leader should be thinking about, every employee should be thinking about, every person should be thinking about, for that matter, in their lives. So thank you both for being on the show and for doing the work that you're doing. And I would love to have you both come back at some point and give us an update on what else we should be thinking about in our lives.
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. It's really been a pleasure talking with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Chris. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into today's show. Hopefully you've gained something that you can use in your own career in a positive way. Until next time, do what you love and show the world how talented you can be today.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2.